In this lecture, we are going to be looking at dance as an art form. So when we talk about dance as an art form or an artwork, what are we actually talking about? Well, we're looking at the human body, right? The motions, the movement of the body itself, and that is the dance form. To get you started, and throughout this lecture, I have different YouTube clips. These are all in here to help explain or to show specific types of dance that we're looking at. The first slide here, I've got two clips I would like you to watch just to kind of get you in the dancing mood. The first is the song is Hozier's "Take Me to Church," and what you're going to see in this is Sergei Polin, who is a Russian ballet dancer. And you're going to see within this is a mixed form. There's going to be some elements of classical ballet within this, yet he also mixes in much more modern ballet. And then the second clip is it's the waltz from the movie Swing Time, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in 1936. This is also a blend of classical forms. We're going to see and hear some waltzing, but there's also going to be some jazz and even some tap. So please take a moment and watch both of these. When we talk about dance, dance is a natural and it's an almost universal activity. In most cultures, there is some type of dance. Whether it's traditional, ritual, it expresses emotion. I mean, think about it. Why do we dance? How many of you have a happy dance when something goes right? Or when, oh, we want to go out and have a good time, let's go dancing, right? It's a form of expression. It's also a means of communication. To watch and understand a dance, you don't have to speak any language. You just have to understand the motions, the movements. Dance is often a social activity. It's usually done in groups. And it's also limited, though, it's limited by temporal constraints, meaning time. That we can't see an entire dance performance in one moment like we can see an entire painting. That it happens across time, such as like with music. You can't experience an entire song in 1 second. Theatrical dance, this is a dance that involves a performer, a performance, and an audience. All right, well, let's look at the different dance forms. Again, dance focuses on the human form in time and space. One of the main tools of the dancer are shoes, and you can often look at a dancer's shoes and tell what kind of dance they're going to be doing. Dance has been categorized into some specific genres, and so we're going to look at a few of these. Well, first we have ballet, modern, world concert or ritual, folk, jazz, musical comedy, and tap. But your book doesn't really talk about musical comedy or tap, but I'm going to here. What musical comedy is, it's a comedic play or movie in which dialogue is interspersed with songs, especially ones with a focus on musical numbers and a simple plot. This often can include like Broadway musicals, classic movies like Singing in the Rain, various other famous works by Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. And these are the musical comedy, where we have some sort of plot, yet it's usually a pretty simplistic plot, but the music, the dancing goes along with it. And then tap. Tap is a form of dance. It's characterized by using the sound of one's tap shoes hitting the floor as almost a percussion instrument. It can also be considered a form of music. And with tap, there are two major variations on tap dance: rhythm or jazz tap and Broadway tap. First is Broadway. Broadway tap focuses more on the dance itself. It's widely performed as a part of musical theater. Highly choreographed. Usually you're going to see the use of props. And you're going to see here, the first clip I have for you is an example of Broadway tap. And this actually is also an example of it from a musical comedy. What you're going to see here in this clip, it's from Singing in the Rain in 1952, starring Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor, and Debbie Reynolds. And what you're going to see within this, pay attention to the tap dancing, but it's again focused more on the dance itself. So it's this again is an example of musical comedy and Broadway. The second clip on this slide is the second type of tap dancing, which is either rhythm or jazz tap. And what happens in rhythm tap? It focuses more on the musicality. And practitioners actually consider themselves to be part of the jazz tradition. So when you watch the clip here, this is actually going to show Gregory Hines in a celebration of Sammy Davis Jr. And what happens is Gregory Hines is tapping and then he pulls Sammy Davis Jr. out. These are two of the greatest and most well-known of the rhythm tappers. And pay attention, especially to the music, that you're going to see that they interact with the band and that it's not so much as the choreographed dance as it was in the Broadway tap, but it focuses more on the musicality of the tap dance. All right, the next form we're going to look at is ballet. Classical ballet developed in the Romantic period, and this time period, about the early 1800s. La Sylphide in 1832 was actually the most popular classical ballet of the time. Ballet follows very prescribed movements and actions. It is highly specialized. And what happens in the classical ballets usually tell a story, yet they tell it without speaking. So the story is told through the music and through dance. Dancing with this in ballet is considered like a living painting or a sculpture. And in fact, one of the quotes about classical ballet is that it's the physical pleasure and feminine beauty. And this is shown through the central role of the romantic ballet through the ballerina. The ballerina is supposed to be light and graceful. She's dressed in tulle, performs on point, which means on toes, on point. And this is very technical. It usually takes about 2 years of training before you ever begin to even dance on point. And again, ballet is very, very exact, yet it's supposed to seem very light, very graceful, and very elegant. It's supposed to almost seem simple to do when in fact it is very difficult. This is a reason why many professional athletes actually practice ballet, especially boxers, football players, especially your receivers, because ballet teaches you how to control every single part of your body. Another George Blankshire said about ballet that it's the reduction of human gesture to bare essentials, heightened and developed into meaningful patterns. And this also became very popular due to the physical skill required for the execution, the strength and the grace. Probably the most famous now of the classical ballets is Swan Lake, 1877, by Tchaikovsky. And the clip I have for you here, this is actually the dying swan. So watch this and look at how the ballerina performs. It seems almost simple and so graceful when actually it's very, very difficult and very, very technical. All right, next we're going to move on to modern dance. Again, with the idea of modernism, it was this idea of make it new. And what modern dance does is it takes all of those rules of ballet and it throws them out the window. It's very anti-ballet in nature and in philosophy. Modern dance began in the 20th century in America. And again, it was this revolt against the traditional bound elements in ballet. It's more of an exploration of natural and spontaneous or uninhibited movement. Usually it does have a narrative element, and it's usually to express some emotion, but not a story, such as classical ballet. In modern dance, we usually see an emphasis on angularity and asymmetry. Unlike classical ballet, which is performed on point and high up, modern dance usually hugs the floor and the dancers usually go barefoot. The first clip you have here, these are the Isadore Duncan dancers. Isadore Duncan, 1878 to 1927, was an American, but she was more successful in Europe, and she is considered the creator of modern dance in 1905. She and her dancers danced barefoot, and they expressed deep emotions. Her works were considered very controversial, and many of the dances were interpreted like moods that were suggested. And so when you watch this first clip, compare it to the classical ballet clip that you just watched. Very free of form, not as highly structured. We do still have some choreography within this, but definitely different. The next clip you're going to see is by Martha Graham, 1893 to 1991. and she's considered the most influential figure in modern dance. And she maintained that artistic individualism is fundamental. She said there are no general rules. Each work of art creates its own code. And often in her work, she had the desire to express emotion first and foremost, disregarding the execution of conventional positions or movements. And she called dancing a graph of the heart. After the Great Depression, she began to explore more political works and themes in her dances, such as in Appalachian Spring in 1944, which dealt with the effects of Puritanism and it depicted overcoming the fire and brimstone of Puritanism through love and common sense. And what you're going to see in this second clip is it's Martha Graham's Lamination from 1930. And this is supposed to show a grieving woman sitting alone. Next, we have world concert or ritual dance. Ritual dance is part of the world concert, and these are dances that are particular to a specific country. For example, Bollywood, the Russian Trepak. You know what part of the world for the globe this is from. A ritual dance is just that. It is a dance based in ritual, meaning it has some ceremonial function. These have formal characteristics and particularly prescribed procedures that pass from generation to generation. Both typically center around topics that are important to a single culture. For example, the indigenous tribes, the Native Americans, you have the rain dance, and that is prescribed to a specific culture. Next, we have what's called the folk dance. Folk dance, this is a body or a group dances this, and it's performed to traditional music. We actually do not know who first developed it, but many different cultures and groups have their own traditional dance. Its characteristics are always identified stylistically with a given culture. It has prescribed movements, rhythms, music, and costumes, and it forms a part of the heritage. And you can see here with the image, I have Irish step dancers. This also, it exists more for group involvement than for performance for an audience like classical ballet. And again, example is Irish step dancing, and the clips I have here, one is the Russian Trepak, and then you're going to see some more of the Irish step dancing from Lord of the Dance. Then we have jazz. Jazz finds its roots in Africa, and here dancers perform for enjoyment, entertainment, and not specifically for an audience. Modern jazz lacks precise definition other than vital theatrical dance rooted in jazz music. Jazz relies heavily on improvisation and syncopation, meaning displaced beats. And you're going to see this in the different clips that I have for you here. The second clip is more of a modern jazz. The first clip is actually from All That Jazz in 1979, which was an American musical film directed by Bob Fosse. So that one's more stylistic, more choreographed. The second one is more of a modern jazz, and so you're going to see some of those elements we just talked about in modern dance. You're going to see that come into the jazz influence. So that's our different forms. Now we're going to take a few minutes to talk about choreography. Choreography is the art of time and space where the human form uses the elements of line, form, and space to create the art. Dance usually relies very heavily on the elements of music. However, music is not a required part to have a dance. You can dance without music. Formalized movement, again, we've already talked about in ballet. All movements in ballet stem from 5 basic leg and foot and arm positions. And here you're going to see this YouTube clip that shows you how to do these 5 basic movements. If you would, please give it a try. These 5 basic positions are a series of fundamental movements and poses, and they form the core of every single movement of the human body in formal ballet. So please give this a try. If you were in class, I'd make you stand up and do it. All right, other elements and principles of composition we can talk about in dance: line, form, and repetition. These all apply to the human body exactly as they would apply to a painting or a sculpture. Line, the body acts as a sculpture as it moves from one position to another. Each pose can be analyzed as composition of line and form. Basically, we're talking about how the body uses the space. And then also line, if we have a group of individuals, right, we can talk about how they move on the dance floor itself, what type of lines the group creates. Repetition, we can talk about that with how the dance is put together. Again, choreographers plan the patterns within the dance, and you can analyze a dance number by observing how these elements work throughout. Rhythm is how the steps in a dance relate coherently. Same sense as a musical number, and you can talk about the rhythm, how they go together. Dance rhythms also occur in spatial arrangements: up and down, back and forth, curved and linear, large, small. And then rhythms also found in the dancer's energy. And we could talk about this in dynamics. Think of like small, quiet movements to very loud, outrageous, exaggerated movements. Like in theater, dance usually builds in a type of pyramid to a climax, and then we have a denouement. Theme, imagery, and storyline. This is how a dance communicates its idea, its content, meaning what's it's about. Sometimes it's a narrative, meaning it tells a story. Sometimes it's more abstract. Maybe there's just a specific theme to communicate, but no storyline. That would be like the Martha Graham piece you watched, where they're trying to communicate this idea of grief, but there's really no story there. Same relation to human emotions or the human condition. Modern ballet and modern dance, you can look at this. Usually these have more of this expressive quality without the storytelling. Or we could have a complete absence of theme and imagery, that there is no narrative or communication in the work, that it's simply meant to be a dance. All right, music. Again, music usually serves as a basis for dance, but it is not necessary. Dance, with or without music, always has rhythm, the relation of the dancer's movements to every other movement in the piece. We've already talked about dynamics with the intensity and the force. You can have great intensity through rapid movement and forceful leaps. And again, dynamics usually build like in a play. You have a pyramid to the apex and then some relaxing to a conclusion. And then, like in theater, we can talk about the mise en scène of a dance, meaning its theatrical elements. We can look at everything from costuming, lighting, the music, the staging, how the choreographer uses space, uses the entire floor, or maybe even a small part. And even costumes can become part of the props. Remember again Martha Graham's Lamentation, where her costume becomes an element of the dance. And lighting is also very important in dance. You must be able to see the body as a three-dimensional form to be able to see the dance. And so lighting can create, add to the story, add to the emotion. It can tell us where to watch the dancers. And so I have another clip for you here, and I want you to pay attention as you're watching this and think about all of these elements. And if you had to formally analyze this clip, how would you do it and what elements would you talk about? And then finally, I want to talk about the Rite of Spring. This is a modernist musical. This was the first modern ballet that was performed. It was written by Igor Stravinsky and it was choreographed by Vasiliev Nijinsky. And they worked together to produce this piece. And what you're going to see, this first premiered May 29th, 1913 in Paris. And what happened was the audience went to see the classical ballet La Sylphide. And then the next show was the Rite of Spring. And what Stravinsky and Nijinsky were doing with the Rite of Spring was they were rejecting all of those ideas of classical ballet. Even the subject matter. Here we're looking at a pagan sacrifice. The costuming, dark and heavy. The makeup, very heavy. The movements are very heavy. In fact, one of the dancers recalled that Nijinsky's shocking choreography was physically unnatural to perform. They said, with every leap, we landed heavily enough to jar every organ in us. And then the music itself, very angular and dissonant, and it was totally unpredictable. And that's what they were trying to do in this. They were challenging those ideas of the classical ballet. And interestingly enough, the audience actually hated it. There were pretty much almost a riot. People were hissing and booing so loud that some of the dancers said they couldn't even hear the orchestra playing. So, what I have for you here again are two different clips. One is from La Sylphide, which is the classical romantic ballet, and then the next one is from the Rite of Spring. And this creation of it is they try. It's a JAF theater, and they tried to stay as close to the original production of the Rite of Spring as they could. So look at both of these, and I would be prepared to be able to talk about comparing and contrasting them, and talking about how the one represents the classical ideals and the other represents the modern ideals.